Mr. President, have you called Governor DeSantis? Have you called Governor DeSantis?
I got them $1.9 trillion relief so far. They're going to be getting checks in the mail that are consequential this week for child care. Workers. I said, yeah, pay them more. This is an employees bargaining chip now. Limited the type of people who could own a gun and what type of weapon you could own. You couldn't buy a cannon. Those who say the blood of patriots, you know, and all the stuff about how we're going to have to move against the government. Well, the tree of liberty is not water with the blood of patriots. What's happened is that
you couldn't buy a cannon. Those who say the blood of the blood of patriots, you know, all this stuff about we're going to have a movement. Well, the tree of liberty is not water with the blood of patriots. What's happened there is that it's never been, if you want. By the way, I'm reading this correctly, okay? I know it probably doesn't make any sense, but Joe Biden wrote it.
Never been. If you wanted to think you need to have weapons to take on the government, you need F-15s and maybe some nuclear weapons.
I saw this meme, and it's just so perfect. Like, here, this is via Luke Rodkowski. So here's Biden. You can't beat the government with guns. And then the government was almost overthrown by an unarmed mob on January 6th.
How should the Department of Defense think about critical race theory?
Could I make a comment, Secretary? I'm sorry.
Well, I'm very limited on my time, General Milley.
Well, I just want to make a comment. The feedback
I know, but
I've gotten
I've asked the question to Secretary Austin.
I don't know what the issue of critical race theory is and what the relevance here with the department. We do not teach critical race theory. We don't embrace critical race theory, and I think that's a spurious conversation.
We can agree there, but the other thing that they raised to me was a seminar that over 100 cadets attended titled Understanding Whiteness and White Rage, taught by a woman who described the Republican Party platform as a platform of white supremacy. This is going on at West Point as we speak. Can you agree at least that understanding whiteness and white rage presented in ICAL over 100 cadets probably is something that we shouldn't be teaching our future leaders of the United States Army?
As you have described it, it certainly sounds like that's something that should not occur. Again, I would like to know the specifics.
On the issue of critical race theory, et cetera, I'll obviously have to get much smarter on whatever the theory is. But I do think it's important, actually, for those of us in uniform to be open-minded and be widely read. And the United States Military Academy is a university. And it is important that we train and we understand. And I want to understand white rage, and I'm white, and I want to understand it. So what is it that caused thousands of people to assault this building and try to overturn the Constitution of the United States of America? What caused that? I want to find that out. I want to maintain an open mind here, and I do want to analyze it. It's important that we understand that because our soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and Guardians, they come from the American people. So it is important that the leaders, now and in the future, do understand it. I've read Mao Zedong. I've read Karl Marx. I've read Lenin. That doesn't make me a communist. So what is wrong with understanding, having some situational understanding about the country for which we are here to defend? And I personally find it offensive that we are accusing the United States military, our general officers, our commissioned, non-commissioned officers, of being, quote, woke or something else because we're studying some theories that are out there. That was started at Harvard Law School years ago, and it proposed that there were laws in the United States, antebellum laws prior to the Civil War, that led to a power differential with African Americans that were 3/4 of a human being when this country was formed. And then we had a Civil War and Emancipation Proclamation to change it. And we brought it up to the Civil Rights Act in 1964. It took another 100 years to change that. So look, I do want to know. And I respect your service, and you and I are both Green Berets. But I want to know. And it matters to our military and the discipline and cohesion of this military. And I thank you for the opportunity to make a comment on that.
He's not just a pig, he's stupid. So Mark Milley reads Mao to understand Maoism. He reads communist to understand communism. But it's interesting that he doesn't read white supremacists to understand white supremacy. Why not go to the source? Well, because Mark Milley would be fired instantly if he read those books, and getting fired is the one thing he doesn't want.
DHS is now concerned about a new conspiracy theory, a new Trump-inspired, Trump-incited kind of rage, white rage, to use the words of General Milley yesterday. And it's this. They're concerned about the Trump reinstatement conspiracy theory. It's just jaw-dropping that, the disgraced, twice impeached ex-president's utterances are now a national security threat.
The biggest risk to the country isn't actually, from outside the country. It's not even necessarily from inside the country, but from the last person that was inside the White House.
And some guy in Montana now has some of this data in his house, in his remote house or cabin. I don't know what he's doing with that. What is just, and again, we don't even know really where he is. What is to stop, this company or these people from just coming forward and saying, oh, well, these ballots were made out of bamboo, or we found traces of bamboo from them because they were shipped from China. Who's to say, obviously it's not the case, but obviously it's not the case, but
yeah.
What do you do in that case?
Yeah, that's a great question, because we think that's there is nothing to stop them from saying any of those things. And so what we have seen it to be our job to do is to shed light on what's happening in the Coliseum the best we can. They are not following best practices, and there's nothing going on here that lends any credibility to the outcome that's going to come out of it. And so, that's what we've been able to do. But I am concerned about what happens when this report comes out, because we know, number one, the election that we certified, those certified results are an accurate reflection of the will of the voters in Arizona. And number two, there's nothing that can be done now to overturn the election, even if this audit was valid. But there are many people, I think you said 1 out of 3 Americans, that believes that Joe Biden was not duly elected. What are they going to do when this report comes out? And that's the scary thing.
One of the big issues we're seeing right now is this audit of the election now taking place in Arizona. They're set to wrap that up at the end of the month, and it's going to go one way or the other. They're going to find fraud, or they're not going to find fraud. What happens when either of those happen?
Okay, I'm exhaling for a reason, and that is that if they do find fraud, first of all, that's almost the dangerous one, even though it may be the likely one. And if they do find fraud, of course, it's not going to be believed. It's going to be disputed immediately by the left, the current administration, the mainstream media, all of it. They're going to find some way to discredit it, and they're going to work as hard as they can to discredit it.
We also are still awaiting their giving us the router logs and things like that to make sure that nothing at the election center was hooked up to the election tabulators and machines and things like that. So the ballot count, though, is nearing completion. The reason they're giving us, if you can believe this, John, is that if our IT professionals who deal with top secret information at the federal government level were to come in and have access to the routers, that they would discover sheriff, deputy, social security numbers on the routers and Maricopa citizen health records on the routers, which is just ludicrous. They told us 2 months ago that they had replaced the routers, all of the internet connectivity equipment at great expense to the county, they told me personally, and that all of that equipment would be on a pallet delivered when we got the rest of the equipment. When that did not happen, they told us that they would give us virtual access to that information. Now remember, the Senate wanted to cooperate with the county and do the audit at their election center. And none of this would have been even a question. But they are the ones, the county said they would not cooperate. At first they told us they would provide the routers and all the equipment, then virtual access, and then they have denied that, saying that we would somehow compromise sheriff, deputy, social security numbers, and county health records. Now, they say they brought in 2 auditors to look at the equipment, and those 2 companies have said that there was no evidence of internet connectivity to the election equipment. But if that's the case, then why prevent the auditors from having access to that same information? We will be done with the hand count and the paper evaluation by the end of this month, like our lease at the Coliseum here allows. I think there's a few to several more weeks of work to do in other areas like voter registration anomalies, checking out whether 50 people are voting from an address where there's a 2-bedroom house or dead people voting. We want to check the envelopes of the ballots that were mailed in those envelopes to make sure it's required by Arizona law that the voter attested by signing the envelope. If there are no signatures on those envelopes, they should never have been opened. So there's a few to several weeks of work to do after the end of this month. And then there's probably a few to several weeks of work to put the comprehensive first forensic audit in the country, history of the country together. So I think we're looking at sometime in August.
And then can we talk about the end of legislative session here in Arizona? If the Senate's going home, what is going to happen with the end of the audit? And
well, obviously, if we find things that need to be fixed in Arizona election laws or procedures in the audit, we would love to have those things considered this year for passage of corrections to those state laws instead of waiting for next year, because if you put it in the regular session next year and the session doesn't end until May or June like this year did, then those bills don't become effective until 90 days later. By that time, you're well into the election of 2022. So one way or another, I personally hope that the legislature and the governor will find a way to either keep the legislative session open, maybe recess instead of sine die, or a commitment maybe to come back for a special session later this fall, so that these corrections, if we find any, can be made this year and be in effect for next year instead of being made next year and not effect until 2024.
Leftist agenda. As Megan Rapinoe takes her rightful place advising us and being one of our models, what do we do with the now unemployed supermodels? Well, logically speaking, they should probably take the place of Megan Rapinoe and the other soccer players on the women's national team. Cause why should sports be played by athletes? That's just oppressive to non-athletes and promotes athletic shaming. Sports should be played by models. And it helps support the athletic positivity movement. And maybe we could also have the models advise the sport of soccer about what rule changes it should make, because that would also make a lot of sense. Communist subversion.
I think what we have to understand is that we are receiving all of this information through the prism of who wants us to get it.
Right.
So there are factions within the national security apparatus, whether it's the Pentagon or the Air Force or other amounts that aren't necessarily coalesced into a single program at this point, but who are motivated to persuade us that this thing is moving. And so whenever you see quick public shifts of opinion on things, I wonder, well, who's benefiting from this, and where is this stuff coming from?
Critical race theory. I have to tell you, I just spent some time reporting on this county in Virginia, about an hour outside of Washington. And to your point, this is something that is mobilizing people and resonating very deeply.
That's important to note, that you mentioned critical race theory a couple times. This is a parent-led backlash at the grassroots level.
It's manufactured.
No,
and
it's completely.
And then sort of
elected
seems to
officials
have been lit. The fire was lit.
I disagree.
It's coordinated. It's aggressive. It's intentional. Right. This is part of the tribalism play. There's no way this is not grassroots. And Brad, you know this is organized and is being paid for.
John McAfee was not suicidal. I spoke with him a few hours before he was found dead. We spoke about the court's decision to extradite him to the U.S. It did not come as a surprise to either of us. We were prepared for that decision and had a plan of action already in place to appeal that decision. I blame the U.S. authorities for this tragedy. Because of these politically motivated charges against him, my husband is now dead. His last words to me were, "I love you, and I will call you in the evening." Those words are not words of someone who is suicidal. All Joe wanted to do was spend his remaining years fishing and drinking. He did not deserve to die in a filthy prison like a caged animal.
Who many of you know as an LGBT Q+ special envoy at the State Department. And yes, we're also making progress, but I know we still have a long way to go and a lot of work to do. If my mother were here, she'd look and say, "Honey, God love you, dear." You say, "Honey, God love you. Secretary, well, first of all, I want to say to, Mr. Secretary, thank you. You're the best, man. Look, our presence here this afternoon makes a simple, strong statement. Pride is back at the White House.
I have a 22-page memorandum that is going to be attached to the sentencing order to emphasize the fact that determining the appropriate sentence in any case, and in this case, is a legal analysis. It's applying the rule of law to the facts of an individual and specific case. Or what the sentence is not based on is emotion or sympathy. But at the same time, I want to acknowledge the deep and tremendous pain that all the families are feeling, especially the Floyd family. Mr. Chauvin, as sentenced for count 1, the court commits you to the custody of the Commissioner of Corrections for a period of 270 months. That's 270. That is a 10-year addition to the presumptive sentence of 150 months. This is based on your abuse of a position of trust and authority, and also the particular cruelty shown to George Floyd.
We agreed on infrastructure. We made serious compromises on both ends. And that's all to say. Where I come from, that's good enough for me.
Everyone contributed to what is the largest infrastructure package in history.
Well, a Democratic plan to greatly expand voting rights in the U.S. failed tonight in the U.S. Senate.
This is all about one thing. Some people don't want some people to vote.
To Rachel Scott live on the Hill tonight. Rachel, Democrats were united on this, but as we pointed out, the Senate 50-50. They did not get one Republican vote, and Democrats plan to make sure Americans know that. What's the reaction so far?
They don't even want to debate it because they're afraid.
The bottom line is that the president and I are very clear. We support S1. We support the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, and the fight is not over.
So this morning, it seems clear that Senate Republicans are afraid to even discuss voting rights. Overnight, all 50 refused to debate a voting bill.
So, how about now? How about now, Democrats? Are you ready to play to win now? Have you had enough? If there's nothing to fix, then why don't you say that to all the red states that say they must pass these laws to fix fraud?
Mr. President, I rise today to celebrate a win for the country. Today, the United States rightly failed to advance the Corrupt Politicians Act, the most dangerous legislation we've considered in the Senate in the 9 years I've served in this body. This bill isn't about protecting the right to vote. It's precisely the opposite. It's about taking away the right to vote from the citizens and giving it instead to the corrupt politicians in Washington who want to stay in power. 36 states have adopted voter ID laws, a reasonable and common sense step to protect the integrity of elections that over 70% of Americans support and over 60% of African Americans support. In fact, recent polling now shows support for voter ID at over 80%, thanks no doubt to the relentless assault on voter ID mounted by Senate Democrats.
A recent Monmouth poll has some interesting numbers. 80% of the American people support requiring a photo ID in order to vote. 91% are Republicans, 87% of independents, and even 62% of Democrats support photo ID.
The Corrupt Politician Act would also automatically register to vote anyone who comes in contact with the government. So if you get a welfare check, if you get an unemployment check, if you have a driver's license, if you go to a state college or state university, you're automatically registered to vote. Well, what's the problem with that? The problem with that, as the authors of the bill know, is that would register millions of illegal aliens to vote. Millions of illegal aliens come into contact with the government, and automatic registration is designed to register millions of illegal aliens. How do we know this? We know this, among other things, because the bill explicitly immunizes the state officials who would be registering illegal aliens to vote. It grants a safe harbor and says when you illegally register illegal aliens, you'll have no liability.
Cal, I want to talk about these sports bans at first. Have been passed now in several states. The lawmakers pushing this legislation, they argue it's about fairness, saying that transgender girls have an unfair advantage. But we've reached out to all the governors who signed these bills to ask if they can name any examples in their state, one example of someone with an unfair advantage.
None of this is based in facts, and it's all about bigotry. The clock is ticking on their bigotry, and they are trying to make life so difficult for these trans youth that they never grow up to be trans adults.
New Zealand has chosen the first transgender athlete to compete at its Olympic Games. Laurel Hubbard is a female weightlifter who will be in Tokyo next month.
Joanna Harper, a medical physicist and competitive runner who is also trans, helped advise the IOC on its guidelines.
Pre-transition and post-transition, did that change your ability to be a competitive athlete?
When I transitioned, within 9 months of hormone therapy, I was running 12% slower. That's the difference between serious male athletes and serious female athletes.
Is it fair?
The absolute answer to that question is still not certain. We need a lot more data before we can come to an absolute conclusion on that.
Picking testosterone is a red herring. I mean, we're forgetting about the anatomy, the fast twitch muscle, the bigger organs.
If you like this video, press like. If you love it, subscribe.